I only want to see my balance, I said calmly. The banker barely looked up at first. Behind me, a line of customers shifted impatiently. Papers rustled. Someone sighed loudly near the door. The faint smell of printer ink and coffee filled the quiet lobby. But then the banker finally glanced at my account number. He smirked. Actually smirked. "Ma'am," he said, leaning back in his chair. "This system is for active accounts." A few people nearby chuckled softly. He clicked the keyboard anyway, clearly expecting nothing. Then the screen loaded. His smile disappeared. The room grew strangely quiet as he stared at the number blinking in front of him. His face slowly turned pale. Have you ever watched someone realize they judged the wrong person? The banker cleared his throat. Once, then again. His fingers hovered above the keyboard like he suddenly wasn't sure what to do with them. The number on the screen hadn't changed. Behind me, someone in line leaned slightly to the side, trying to see the monitor. Another person whispered something under their breath. I didn't turn around. I just stood there quietly, because moments like that don't need reactions. They reveal themselves naturally. The banker finally looked up at me again, this time with a very different expression. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this account has been inactive for a long time." "I know," I replied. "Have you ever watched someone search for a way to correct their mistake without admitting it?" He adjusted his tie. "Well, accounts like this usually require additional verification." Of course they did. 5 minutes earlier he had been laughing. Now suddenly there were procedures, policies, formalities. I nodded calmly. That's fine. The truth was, this account had been sitting quietly for nearly 12 years. Most people assumed I'd closed it, or emptied it. Even the bank had stopped contacting me years ago. But sometimes silence isn't absence. Sometimes it's patience. While the banker typed carefully, I let my eyes drift around the lobby. Polished marble floors, muted lighting. The same bank branch I had walked into hundreds of times years ago, back when I was a completely different person. Back when people like this banker didn't just underestimate me, they dismissed me. Because 12 years earlier, I had stood at this very counter under very different circumstances. 12 years earlier, I had walked into the same bank wearing a second-hand blazer and shoes that were slightly too big. I remember how nervous I felt that day. Not because of the bank itself, because of what that small account meant to me. At the time, I had just started my first real job after finishing college. The salary wasn't impressive. The office was small. The commute took almost an hour every morning. But it was mine. My own beginning. Have you ever opened your first bank account and felt like it was the first real step toward independence? I had stood in line holding a small envelope with my first paycheck inside. When the teller asked what I wanted to do with it, I said something simple. I'd like to open a savings account. Nothing special. Just a place to start building something. The banker that day had smiled politely and helped me fill out the forms. Saving early is smart, he said. I believed him. So I did, something most people my age weren't thinking about yet. I started saving aggressively. Every month. No matter what. Even when it meant skipping vacations. Even when my friends bought new cars or expensive clothes. I kept depositing money. Year after year. Sometimes small amounts. Sometimes larger ones when work started going better. But life has a strange way of changing your priorities. About 5 years later, my career began moving faster than I ever expected. Promotions. Investments. New opportunities. Eventually, my financial life became complicated enough that I moved most of my accounts elsewhere. Better banks. Private advisors. Different strategies. And quietly, this old account stayed behind. Not closed. Not forgotten. Just untouched. Have you ever left something in the past because your life simply moved forward? The banker at the counter continued typing. His expression grew more serious with every second. Because what he was seeing on that screen wasn't the account of someone who had simply stopped using a bank. It was the account of someone who had never stopped saving. The banker's fingers slowed, then stopped. For a moment he simply stared at the monitor, his eyebrows tightening as if the numbers didn't make sense. "Ma'am, just to confirm," he said carefully. "You said you only wanted to check the balance?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "Nothing more, nothing less." Have you ever noticed how quickly a person's tone changes once they realize they may have misjudged someone? A few minutes earlier he had been smirking. Now he was suddenly very polite. He clicked through a few more screens, likely verifying the account history. Then his eyes widened slightly, because the deposits didn't tell a simple story. There were the early ones from my 20s, small but consistent, then larger transfers, then long stretches of silence where the account had simply grown on its own. Interest. Investments tied to it years earlier, quiet accumulation. The banker leaned back in his chair. I could almost see the moment the realization hit him. This wasn't an abandoned account. It was a sleeping one. And sometimes sleeping accounts wake up with surprising strength. The lobby behind me had grown quieter. Two people who had been chatting earlier were now completely silent. One of them shifted slightly to see the screen better. I still hadn't turned around. There was no need. Because moments like this aren't about proving anything. They reveal everything on their own. Finally, the banker cleared his throat again. "Ma'am," he said, lowering his voice slightly. "Yes, I think it might be best if we discuss this in my office." That was interesting. 5 minutes ago I had barely deserved his attention at the counter. Now suddenly there was an office involved. Have you ever seen respect appear instantly when money enters the room? I gave a small nod. All right. But as he stood up and motioned for me to follow him, I noticed something else. His hands were slightly shaking, which made me wonder. His office was small. Glass walls, a simple desk, 2 chairs across from each other. The kind of room designed to make conversations feel private even when everyone outside can still see you. He closed the door gently behind us. Then he sat down and turned the monitor slightly so I could see it. For a moment he didn't speak. He just studied the numbers again, almost like he wanted to make sure they hadn't changed. Have you ever watched someone realize they handled a situation the wrong way, and now they're trying to figure out how to recover from it? Ma'am, he said slowly, choosing his words carefully now. This account has grown significantly over the years. I nodded. Yes, I know. The truth was I had known for a long time. I just hadn't needed to check. Because my life had moved in directions I never expected, back when I opened that account. What began as careful saving eventually turned into something larger. Business partnerships, investments, property deals. None of it happened overnight. But little by little my financial world expanded. Meanwhile, this account sat quietly in the background, like a reminder of where everything began. The banker scrolled again. More numbers. More records. His breathing became slightly heavier. Finally, he turned the screen toward me fully. There must be some mistake, he whispered. But there wasn't. The number was still there. Very large. The kind of number that makes people pause before saying it out loud. Outside the office, I could see 2 employees pretending to organize paperwork while clearly watching our conversation. Word spreads fast in places like banks. Especially when something unusual happens. The banker swallowed hard. Ma'am, are you aware of the total balance? I met his eyes calmly. A quiet silence filled the room. Then he asked the question he had probably been holding back since the moment the screen loaded. Why did you leave this much money here for so long? That was a fair question. But the answer wasn't really about money. It was about something much simpler. Patience. I looked at the screen for a moment. Then back at him. You asked why I left the account untouched, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. His voice carried a careful politeness now, completely different from the casual laughter earlier. The truth was simple. But people often expect complicated answers when money is involved. I didn't leave it for a reason, I said. Life just moved forward. Have you ever built something slowly, so gradually that you almost forget where it started? For me, that small savings account had been the beginning of everything. Back then, every deposit felt important. Every dollar mattered. Because it represented independence, discipline, possibility. But as my career expanded, new accounts appeared. Investment portfolios, partnership ventures, real estate deals. The financial world around me grew larger and more complex. And quietly, this little account stayed exactly where it had always been. Untouched. Almost like a time capsule. The banker leaned forward slightly. I understand, he said, though his expression suggested he was still trying to process the situation. Outside the glass wall, two employees were clearly watching now. One of them whispered something to the other. Banks are places where numbers usually follow predictable patterns. Savings, withdrawals, mortgages. But when a number suddenly appears that breaks those patterns, people notice. The banker cleared his throat again. Ma'am, with an account balance of this size, we usually assign a private wealth advisor. I almost smiled. 5 minutes ago, I had simply wanted to check a balance. Now suddenly I needed an advisor. Isn't it interesting how quickly people adjust their treatment once they realize who they're dealing with? I appreciate the offer, I said calmly. But I didn't come here for services. He nodded carefully. Another quiet pause settled in the room. Then I said the one thing he clearly wasn't expecting. I actually came to close the account. His head snapped up. Close it? Yes, because the truth was this: account had served its purpose long ago. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do with the past is finally let it go. For a moment, the banker simply stared at me. Close the account? He repeated quietly, as if the idea itself didn't make sense. I nodded. Have you ever noticed how people react when money moves in a direction they didn't expect? He leaned back in his chair, clearly trying to understand. Ma'am, if I may ask why? It wasn't curiosity about the money. It was curiosity about the decision. Most people would celebrate a balance like that. Expand it. Protect it. Grow it further. But for me, this account had already finished its story. This account was the beginning of something, I said slowly. When I opened it, I was 22. I could still remember the feeling. Standing nervously at that same counter. Holding my first paycheck. Believing that every small deposit meant progress. And it served its purpose, I continued. But my life moved on. New businesses and new investments, new goals. This account had simply stayed frozen in time. The banker nodded slowly, absorbing that. I see. Outside the office window, the two employees had now been joined by a third person pretending to review paperwork. People were curious. Not about me. About the number. Numbers have a strange power over people. But I had learned something important over the years. Money isn't the destination. It's a tool. And tools are meant to move, not sit quietly in forgotten accounts. So yes, I said calmly, I'd like to close it. The banker exhaled slowly. That will require some paperwork. That's fine. He turned back to his computer and began preparing the forms. But before he could start printing them, he hesitated, then asked one final question. If you don't mind me asking, what will you do with it? That was actually the easiest question of the day, because the answer had been clear to me for years. I smiled slightly. Something more meaningful than letting it sit in a bank. The banker finished printing the paperwork and slid the documents across the desk. For the first time since I walked in, the room felt completely calm. No tension. No awkwardness. Just quiet understanding. He watched carefully as I signed the final page. One signature and the account that started my entire financial journey was officially closed. Everything will be processed within 24 hours, he said politely. Thank you, I replied. As I stood up, I noticed the employees outside quickly pretending to focus on their work again. Curiosity satisfied. Drama finished. Have you ever noticed that the moments people expect to be the most dramatic often end the most quietly? There were no speeches. No celebration. Just a simple ending. At the counter earlier, the banker had laughed because he assumed something about me. He assumed the woman asking to see her balance couldn't possibly surprise him. But life has a way of revealing quiet surprises. And the truth is, the number on that screen was never the most important part of the story. The important part was what that small account represented. Discipline. Patience. Years of steady effort when no one else was watching. Before leaving, I turned back toward the banker once more. If there's one thing I've learned, I said calmly, it's that small beginnings can grow into something extraordinary. He nodded slowly. Outside, the bank doors opened as I stepped back into the afternoon sunlight. And for the first time in years, that chapter of my life was finally closed. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and share your thoughts below. Sometimes the quietest journeys create the biggest results. What would you do in that moment? Comment below.